Hi, everyone. I am Dawn Wise, the CEO of MCE, and we are an 11-year-old community choice program serving Solano, Napa, Contra Costa, and Marin counties. And I'm really honored to have the opportunity to moderate this panel today on building out to 2045. So just a little background, California's Senate Bill 100 set us on the path to a carbon-free electricity future for the state. And to get there, it will not be business as usual. It will take innovation and new steel in the ground projects. When MCE began serving customers in 2010, most utilities in California only had 10 to 15% renewables in their portfolio. But since that time, we've seen a dramatic change in the amount of renewable energy on the grid. And we've seen that CCAs are clean energy procurement powerhouses. So the folks we're going to hear from on this panel are in the business of getting clean energy projects built. We're going to explore a wide range of resources that are being deployed to get California to a carbon-free future. And we're going to touch on some challenges and solutions along the way. First, we're going to hear from Tristan Gimbert, who is the CEO of Edf Renewables. He leads Edf Renewables activities throughout North America. He oversees three primary business lines: grid scale power, asset optimization, and distributed solutions. So I'm going to hand it over to Tristan.
Good afternoon, Dawn, and everyone. Thank you for making some time for me. So yes, I'm leading Edf Renewable in North America. We are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, renewable company in the US. We are founded in 1987, more or less the date of my birth. A little bit younger, but we've been developing 2 gigawatts in California with 20 gigawatts in North America total. We have about 600 employees in California, 40 large utility scale project, wind, solar, battery, and we're also very present behind the meter with about 50 rooftop project for CNI customers, as well as about 7,000 EV chargers across California. So I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about the massive endeavor that SB 100 represents. COP26 reminded us how much we have to do and how quickly we have to act. And I think California has set up the stage for that. Yet it's still a massive build out, a massive effort that is needed, including substantial gigawatt in offshore wind and long duration storage. So we have big challenges in front of us. And I would like to highlight a few of those as we get started, 4 of them. And the first one and the main one is really transmission. Transmission in many different aspects. We need to get the megawatt hours, the renewable megawatt hours to the customers, to the load. And for that, there are different things that need to happen that are not happening fast enough today. One of them is expediting the near-term transmission build out of upgrades. There is a lot of no-brainer upgrades that can be done, and that needs to be done quickly. We're not doing that enough. Secondly, we need to expand long-term planning to a long-term build-out of new lines across the state and also across the region. The RTO regionalization is a key challenge. It can bring up to $2 billion of benefit if we do the regionalization fast and well. I think that's a key challenge that California needs to make sure happen. And lastly, near-term, long-term planning, regionalization, and lastly, Q reform. Today, we have some still major dysfunction in the CalCCA supercluster process, which is really too crowded and leading to 6 to 10 years of lag for interconnection, whereas we used to be in 3 to 5 years. So we absolutely need to lift that bottleneck and move faster from that point of view. So long-term planning and significant transmission efforts are necessary along those four dimensions for us to avoid to be able to meet the SB 100 challenges. The other thing I would like to highlight is that the second challenge, I think, is electrification. We are, of course, making a lot of progress in the power sector itself to green ourselves. But let's not forget that greenhouse gas emission in California, I think only 15% comes from the electricity sector. The transportation is 40%. The industrial activities are about 25%. So there is a massive need for electrification that is going to happen. Of course, it goes with electric vehicle in particular. I mean, as EDF and PowerFlex, our subsidiary behind the meter, are in the front line of that with the 7,000 EV charging station that we have installed in California. But we need to go faster and allow that transition to happen. I don't think all the tools are ready today. Thirdly, along those lines, in particular thinking about hydrogen, we need to find a way to favor the emergence of new technologies that are not present in California today. I'm sure we'll talk, because Don loves to talk about that. We'll talk about hydrogen. Green hydrogen is fundamental. The Build Back Better plan is a key instrument, I think, to get there. But there is a lot to do to develop the right business model in transportation and in the power business as well. The other technology that we need to work on is offshore wind. There is still significant technical challenges, permitting challenges. We're very successful on the East Coast. I think that California has to iron out some of those permitting and technical challenges, but also find a procurement process. I think it's a good topic that we can discuss later in the panel, is how do we secure a credit-worthy offtake and procurement mechanism for projects that cost billions and billions of dollars. So another one that we need to find the mechanism to emerge. And lastly, in those new technology, long duration storage is key. I'm sure we'll have some discussion about pump storage, but also flow batteries and other technologies are emerging that will allow us to provide some long duration storage. The mechanism are not there yet. We have some work to do, but I'm hopeful that the technology will emerge. So I mentioned transmission, I mentioned electrification, I mentioned the new technology. The fourth item I would like to highlight as a key challenge for SB 100 in California is land use. It's becoming really difficult to find land to develop renewable projects that do not conflict with other use like ag or urbanization, to say the least. And the various counties are struggling to find compatible land use. So it's a topic that we have to sit down with the stakeholders and find a solution to find the right land to be able to prevent climate change to continue to happen. So in a nutshell, I look forward to having the discussion with our panelists, but that's the four topics that I would love to raise with everybody on the panel and in the attendance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tristan. I see lots of hand clapping. Great information to get us kicked off here. I really appreciate it. Next, we're going to hear from Cody Hoovin, who is the Chief Operating Officer for San Diego Community Power. And Cody has been a driving force in seeing San Diego Community Power come to fruition and launch. I've known her for many years, since the very beginning. She's been working on this, and they are now one of the largest CCAs in California, and going to be doing a lot of procurement. I know they're already doing a lot of procurement. So let me turn it over to you, Cody.
Thanks, Dawn. All right, well, hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I'm assuming you all can hear me, since there's no way for me to know unless I hear otherwise. As Dawn mentioned, it's been a long time coming, it feels like, to get where we are today. And it's pretty fantastic that we're even where we are. You know, we're talking a lot about challenges in the market, and I'll speak to you from the perspective of a brand new CCA who's just getting off the ground. So a little bit of just background on who we are and our stats, I guess. So we currently have 5 member cities in our region. We're in the San Diego County area. Yes, there is life after LA, and that's us down here near the border. And we just added 2 new cities that will be joining, and we'll start service to them in 2023. Actually, one is the county, and one is another a smaller city that we'll serve. So in terms of size, as Dawn mentioned, we're pretty big. We're about, I don't know, 1,800 megawatts in peak demand, and probably approaching about 7,000 gigawatt hours once we add those two new communities to our service. One other interesting fact, I guess, about us from a size perspective is SDG&E is our incumbent utility. And unlike PG&E territory, we're about half of their territory with just those 7 member agencies. So the sense of scale is a little bit different down here. So we're doing really well. We've started service to our municipal accounts and our commercial and industrial accounts for our first tranche of customers. That's about 70,000 accounts or so. We're adding another 700,000 throughout the spring of 22. And then, as I mentioned, adding 2 new communities in 2023. So I'm being asked to speak about, from a load serving entity perspective and being a new market participant. I would say the biggest challenge for us as a new load serving entity just entering the market is, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, but we're being expected to fly when we just hatched out of our little egg, and here we are being expected to know everything and fly and meet all the compliance obligations, meet our power needs, and then do all the basics that we have to do as well to just start up an organization. I could list all the things that everybody's familiar with, but regulatory requirements, just in the time since our region, we've started talking about community choice to now being actually living it. Regulatory requirements have gotten tighter and more restrictive, and for our size, dollar amounts and margins are just getting much, much more narrow. It's not often that the regulatory arena is set up to consider CCAs, even though, Don paved the way a long time ago. It feels like there's still a lot of considerations that are really structured or considering the investor-owned utilities first, and just some funky structures that we have to deal with. So, for example, we have to get our data from our competitor, essentially, which is our utility, or you have to, get power from your competitor, and those types of relationships are a bit strange for anybody else in any other business sector. Of course, we're really seeing the community pressure. We were formed with a lot of community support, a lot of advocacy, and that was really something that was of interest to everybody here in our region, was to be a community organization and really listen to our community, which is fantastic. And they're holding our feet to the fire, and that's what they should be doing. So really trying to balance all those expectations, right, of people concerned about where power is sited, and people concerned about where jobs are created, and all the things that go with the community expectations. Of course, I think Tristan already mentioned it, but land use issues and land use permitting, all those types of things. And then this new kind of NIMBYism that we're experiencing with where to site projects. And then, of course, the fight of how local can you get with power, and can it just be all rooftop, and expectations in the community around that as well. Market prices, as we all know, it's a wild time to be entering this business. And then we're also being new. We're starting from scratch. Everything is from scratch. Our staffing is from scratch. Our reserves are at zero when we start. Our financing is all brand new. So we're starting out and having to kind of prove ourselves, but also, as I mentioned, hit every compliance target and every requirement. So really, I think, there's some developers on here, and really, as a relationship we start to build with everybody, having an understanding of the pressures that we're under, but the success that we are, sure to see. I think that's a really good place to start, from these kind of building these relationships and these business transactions. And then, we're really excited to get to all the really fun stuff, the cool, innovative programs and procurement concepts that we can bring to the table. But we're also trying to lay a good foundation. So when I was first getting into this, I was talking to another director of a CCA, and she said, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I feel like I'm walking around with a gun to my head every day." And she said, "Well, if it ever really happens, at least now you'll be fine with it." And that's how I feel. So I feel good that I could handle almost anything. And I think we're doing really great, and I'm excited to see where we get to, and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cody. Thank you for those great insights. And I know we're going to have a lot of questions coming up soon. Thanks for sparking a lot of good questions. I want to turn now to our next panelist. We're going to hear from Alex Mcclear, who is the Senior Vice President for the West Region of Calpine Corporation. Since 2014, he has led the commercial team in California and the West, and he collaborates with the government and regulatory affairs team with Calpine on policy and advocacy as well. He also served as Calpine's Vice President of Strategic Origination and Development for the West region between 2009 and 2014. So you can ping him with those sorts of questions as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alex.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dawn. And thanks to all of you. Really appreciate your business, first of all, and also appreciate the invitation to talk to you about new technologies and policy constructs and ways of trying to meet our climate and environmental goals. So Calpine was founded in 1984, and our first megawatt was a megawatt up at the geysers. And since then, we've grown to 26,000 megawatts in 23 states. And we have about 7,500 megawatts in the Western Interconnect. Most of our megawatts are natural gas combined cycles. We're probably the largest operator in the world of what are called F-class turbines. You can sort of think of us as the Southwest Airlines of generation for a particular type. And so what I'm going to talk about today is really the importance of the combined cycle generation fleet to California. And it's been historically probably, and I would argue the most significant impacting technology with respect to decarbonizing the electric sector. Through the development of the CCGTs, which started about 20 years ago, because of improvements in efficiency, we were able to reduce the amount of CO2 production or the CO2 load from the electric sector. As Tristan mentioned, overall, the electric sector produces about 15% of the CO2 load for California, and it's about 9% of the load associated with in-state generation. And one of the other components that's important to think about with respect to the CCGTs, and not only displacing less efficient gas generation and also coal generation, but it's also its inherent flexibility and really the platform that it provided in integrating a substantial amount of renewables build out. The inherent flexibility that's in the system, has allowed for sort of, lower capacity value, high variable, high intermittent resources to be able to be incorporated. So with my next slide, one of the things that we've been thinking about, since we have a large fleet of combined cycle generation units in California, but also across the country, is what's the role going forward? I mean, we've had a significant role over the last 20 years. What's the role going forward? Any of the studies in California, any of the studies with respect to resource planning would indicate that most, if not all, of the existing combined cycle facilities will be in operation, into the next decade, probably through the end of the next decade, unless we see a real change in technology, something that we haven't thought about or have thought about, but maybe have put on the sideline. And so in thinking about the role of our fleet, one of the things that we've been thinking about is, okay, well, we will likely operate less, and that's okay. We will be the sort of the catcher in the rye, the units that are providing the insurance, to keep system reliability stable and, to allow for greater electrification of the economy. But we've also been thinking about other technologies that could be deployed. And so we've been looking very seriously at carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And we've also been looking at alternative fuels, in particular hydrogen. And so the slide that's up now, and where we've landed to sort of get to the punchline is where we're going to focus our efforts is on a point of emission carbon capture. We think that this is actionable now. We think that it's cost effective, and we think it's particularly suitable for where we are in the energy transition. So, few things. One of the things that that we're finding, and we've spent a lot of time on this, is that we're, you know, the capture technology itself is very mature. Carbon capture has been deployed in industrial applications for over 100 years. It's relatively new in the combined cycle arena, and that's because from a CO2 concentration standpoint, the flue gas, or the exhaust, if you would, has a fairly low concentration of CO2. So getting the chemistry right and the energy content right in order to extract the CO2 is, you know, a process improvement that, you know, we're working on, and where there's been, you know, a great deal of progress recently. Second thing that I wanted to point out is the geology in California is terrific for CCUS deployment. Some of the best geology in the world. In fact, a recent study by Stanford and the Energy Futures Initiative indicated that California has the capacity to permanently sequester 60 million tons of CO2 per year for the next 1,000 years. The other thing that's favorable with the geology is it's proximate to a number of concentrations of stationary source emissions. The third part is that there's already in place through a tax provision in the federal code called 45Q, a substantial federal support. It's currently $50 a ton. In the Reconciliation or Build Back Better Act, that number would increase to $85. What our numbers are showing with respect to deployment in California is that we think that the all-in price for carbon sequestered at this point in time with CCUS is somewhere, you know, around $100. So thinking about $85 with the 45Q subsidy, and thinking about the pricing that we've been recently seeing with AB 32, we're sort of right on the nose. So we feel pretty good about this as, you know, something that would be economically viable. And then finally, the point that I'd like to make about, you know, CCUS, and this is a point that Tristan had made, is while the electricity sector is a relatively, you know, modest contributor, though a significant contributor to, wait a second, that made no sense. We're 9% of the carbon load in the state. The industrial sector is about 25% of the load. One of the things that would be beneficial about looking at CCUS deployment is the ability to create industrial hubbing opportunities with shared facilities, and the ability to go after other large stationary sources in other hard-to-reach industries, whether it's cement, whether or not it's chemical production, or whether or not it's even new industries such as blue hydrogen creation, management of ag or forest waste, or even direct air capture. So you can imagine that if you were to create CO2 pipelines and develop sequestration sites, that you would be able to essentially bring in other sectors of the economy. And I think that that's really important to think about, to have more of a holistic approach to a resource planning. So then if I could go to my next slide. Thanks. So, so this is part of our analysis in looking at green hydrogen. So first of all, we've been looking at the retrofits of our existing plants in order to take probably, you know, at least initially, a blended quantity of hydrogen, whether or not it's blue or green, to be able to combust and to operate our facilities. And without very much investment, our facilities can take a substantial amount, a substantial percentage of hydrogen if it were made available. With our peaking facilities, somewhere upwards of 60%. Without a complete repower in our combined cycles, probably between 30 and 40%. So that's pretty exciting. What is, you know, sort of in thinking about how we want to engage, we at this point do not think that we will be in the business of looking to produce hydrogen, or at least not green hydrogen. And if you can see this panel, and I can just sort of walk through it quickly, if we were to take the fuel requirements to operate a combined cycle, let's say a 500 megawatt plant, which is sort of the standard, California's got more or less 25 of them, and you operate it at 60% capacity factor, which is more or less, that you would look for one plant that you would need around 4 gigawatts of solar. That is currently about a third to a quarter of the installed solar that we have right now. You take up a land mass, and land use issues are important, are highly important, and also very determinative of your development success. Of approximately 100 square miles, and you'd have a question of how you would go about managing the hydrogen and what sort of storage is available. And so that goes into the thinking as well. So I thought I would just share this. This helped us educate where we were going to go strategically. And anyways, again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your business, and thank you for the invitation to speak.
Alex, thank you so much. That was great. Really appreciate the overview there. And next, we're going to hear from Jim Chandelov, who is the Vice President of Origination and Development for NextEra Energy Resources. He leads the origination team for utility-scale solar, storage, and wind projects in the West. He has had 9 years with NextEra and 30 years in the industry. So I'll turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you. Am I on the stage now?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
All right, great. Thank you. All right. Well, first of all, I wish this was in person. It's been great to see a lot of familiar faces today, and look forward to meeting up in person sometime soon. Now, a little bit about NextEra Energy Resources. I think many of you are familiar with our company. We have several contracts with several of the CCAs here. But real quick, outside of our sister company, Florida Power and Light, which serves about 5 million customers in Florida, NextEra Energy Resources owns and operates about 24,000 megawatts of generation throughout the U.S., primarily in 38 states and Canada. Since 1989, the company has invested nearly $8 billion in California in energy infrastructure, and currently owns and operates about 3,000 megawatts of wind, solar, and energy storage. Just recently, over the period of last April through August, we brought on 460 megawatts of 4-hour storage in Southern California that helped keep the grid reliable this past summer. Thinking about where we've been and where we're going, early in my career, I remember back when I lived in the South and working for Southern Company, I thought coal was the best thing ever because it was cheap and abundant. But certainly have turned the corner and learned a lot since then. And my first visit to a renewable facility was in Southern California to one of the SEGS projects in San Bernardino County in 2001. And today, as luck would have it, we're actually decommissioning 150 megawatts of those solar thermal units and are taking those apart right now. And we'll be starting construction next year on a new solar PV and storage facility that will serve Valley Clean Energy and Clean Power Alliance, both. So I want to echo some of the comments I heard from Tristan and others on the panel here, in particular about land use and transmission. Those are the top two things in my mind where we see constraints to growth and impediments. So for transmission, whether it's wind from Wyoming and New Mexico, whether it's solar and geothermal in Nevada, whether it's solar from the Central Valley or even more in Southern California, we've got to start building more transmission. These things take multiple, seems like sometimes a couple of decades to build a line. And so many times now we've seen interconnection studies going back many, many clusters ago. We see interconnection studies that typically have the same results year after year, like each subsequent cluster will have some of the same results of projects required for deliverability. It'll be the same 500 kV lines named, the same 230 kV lines named, but because of all the flux in the interconnection queue that are constantly happening with people dropping in, with people coming in and dropping out, all in the constant flux, it seems like some of these big projects never get built. It's a chicken and egg, and the challenge is who's going to pay for that transmission. It's hard to have a developer step up to pay for a portion of a line if other developers also don't step up to pay for a portion of that line, because then that line doesn't get paid for. So we need better solutions on how we build more of this infrastructure, how we get it permitted, and overcome some of the obstacles in getting those projects done quickly. From a land use perspective, similar concern that Cody expressed as well. It's compatibility of land use, and I'll give a couple of examples. Or one example, San Bernardino County. It's the largest county in the state. It's one of the sunniest parts of the world, or certainly in America and in the Southwest, yet they don't want to see any solar. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to put a lot of solar in San Bernardino County and find some compatible land there? I think part of the issue there that may go away is the California property tax exclusion for solar. And I know that it's hard not to like that as a developer, and it's hard not to like that as a customer, because it helps lower the cost of generation when a solar project doesn't pay property taxes. But I'd like to think that when that exclusion expires at the end of 2024 for any new projects going forward, perhaps some of the counties that have been and local jurisdictions that have been opposing solar, perhaps the opinion changes once some property taxes are available and the projects aren't taking away what is arguably thought of as ag revenue or otherwise that would be coming from those properties. In other cases, you've got widely available land in certain parts of the Central Valley that is not currently used for agriculture. It's fallowed, but there's a shortage of transmission infrastructure. So it brings us back to that very same issue on infrastructure. You can put the solar there, but you can't get it out. So, and on a related note on land use, we've also seen more than one example in storage, where we go into a county or a local jurisdiction, maybe a city, to propose an energy storage project that is located, say, directly next to a big substation. Yet energy storage has never been contemplated because it didn't exist several years back, and it's never been contemplated in the general plan, and it's not even a permitted land use. So there may need to be some more political solutions in that regard, whether it's more collaboration between state and local or CEC jurisdiction. There may need to be there's definitely opportunity there for stakeholders, as Tristan mentioned as well, to work on land use compatibility. And if we all have this common goal to decarbonize by 2045, something's got to give. It can't all go out of state. It can't all go offshore. We've got to put some generation here in California. So let me pivot just a little bit to deliverability and resource adequacy. And this issue has been near and dear to my heart for a number of years, and I'm not sure how much depth some of you in the audience have on this. So I'm going to go down into the weeds a little bit. I think the purpose of this discussion is to maybe help better align the procurement cycle and the deliverability allocation cycle between the CCAs and the California ISO. So the process, it could use some improvement. So today, when a project wants to pursue deliverability, it basically has two shots through the interconnection process. With some limited exceptions, it has two opportunities to pursue deliverability. In the December of the year following your phase 2 results. And when you get your phase 2 results at the California ISO, that's typically the first time you really get a true look at the scope and timing of the upgrades that you need, both in terms of cost and schedule. The phase 1 studies, due to the size of the clusters, are typically not that meaningful. They're indicative, but not very meaningful. So you really get a good look after your phase 2 results. So your first shot to pursue deliverability in the California ISO process is about 2 weeks after getting that phase 2 study result. At that point, a developer submits an affidavit to the CAISO under penalty of perjury, describing or attesting to the commercial progress of the project in three main categories: the firmness of site control, the status of permitting, whether you're early stage or late stage permitting with a bunch of resolution and granularity there, and thirdly, PPA status. Are you willing to proceed to COD without a PPA? Are you on a short list? Or do you have a PPA? So, and the ISO takes that and scores a project given a certain number of points and allocates deliverability typically in the March following that December application. So you're about 2 years after you've applied for a connection, you get a sense of will you or will you not have deliverability. Now, getting that allocation of deliverability still isn't the end. Just because you get it doesn't mean you're going to have deliverability upon COD of the project. It means that you'll get deliverability when the necessary upgrades are done. And there's plenty of history of some projects getting done on time. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. Some projects get done on time and deliverability arrives on time, but there are plenty of examples where certain transmission owner upgrades are delayed and someone who thought they were going to get deliverability at COD ends up getting it potentially a year later or 2 years later. And there are opportunities to do interim deliverability in the meantime, but I'm not going to go that deep. So where I'm going with all this is that where I think the process can improve is that with the ISO running this process, typically in the December through March timeframe each year, I think there's an opportunity for CCAs for whom deliverability is important, and I think that's everybody, that consider conducting your RFPs at a time of year when you can shortlist projects by the end of November, which is when those affidavits are due to the California ISO. That can allow a project to say that it's shortlisted and potentially score higher. And if the projects are in fact selected in an RFP by one or more CCAs, then ultimately the best projects rise to the top and may get that assignment of deliverability. So that being said, like I mentioned at the beginning, a project gets 2 shots at deliverability. So if it doesn't make it the first time, it gets to try a second time, after which, with limited exception, it becomes energy only. So another challenge for us as developers is a very short window in which to get that key deliverability attribute. And as we all know, deliverability is very scarce and not a lot of it out there. Okay, enough on deliverability. I know that that issue spins a lot of our heads. So I want to turn to hydrogen. So I was glad to hear both Tristan and Alex mention hydrogen. That's something we're looking at very closely as well. And it's definitely part of the solution for the future. It's the most abundant element on Earth. It's already used in plenty of commercial industrial applications, whether it's fertilizer or plastics or metals. And typically when you produce hydrogen, you use your typical power mix, your typical electricity. So you've got carbon emissions from producing that hydrogen. So what we're looking at is opportunities to produce hydrogen with wind or solar. We then take that wind or solar energy and put it into an electrolyzer, which splits water into hydrogen and oxygen. And then that hydrogen can be used as a dispatchable fuel in a power plant or other industrial and transportation applications. So as we are, in some cases, retiring traditional gas-fired power plants in California, at least the ones through cooled units, as we keep other ones running, as Calpine works on carbon capture, as Calpine looks at potentially burning some green hydrogen, probably next era Calpine should talk about some hydrogen in the coming decade, because that is an opportunity to still have dispatchable power. And really going back to some of the earlier sessions with Jan Pepper and Peninsula and 24/7 carbon-free energy, if we can have dispatchable GHG-free energy, that really gets us there, in addition to all the other tools in our toolbox like energy storage. Lastly, there's a lot of work being done at the federal level, the Build Back Better Act or some variant of that may happen that would extend potentially tax credits for wind and solar, and also potentially put in new tax credits for energy storage as well as for hydrogen. So any or all of these potential opportunities absolutely will contribute to the longer term lower cost of clean energy here in California, and for that matter, nationally. But all of this stuff is important, but we really have to get back to the roots of land use and transmission here in California. And as our folks at the CEC, as other folks look at forecasting where all the supply is going to come from, we just need to be sure and take a very realistic, true look at how much land is there really to develop and how much transmission is there really to carry it, and when will that extra transmission get built. And on that, I'll pause.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was fantastic. And we're going to bring all of our panelists up onto the stage. There we go. We've got everyone. Wonderful. So we will now turn to questions. And for those of you who in the audience who would like to ask a question, you can just type your question into the Q&A tab on your screen. And while those are rolling in, I have a couple of questions that came in advance that I'll start off with. The first one is, this is a question for Cody. And Cody, one of the questions that came up is, and this relates a bit to what Jim was just talking about, how do rules around resource adequacy and deliverability impact your decision-making and trajectory? And after we hear from Cody, I'd also be curious to hear from our developers about that same question.
So, Don, to be clear, how do rules around resource adequacy affect our decision-making? Is that kind of the question?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Procurement decisions, particularly.
Right. I would say most simply, it's just a financial impact, right? So we have big ideas and big goals and a lot of big expectations on us to procure as much power, new build, local, all the things that we all want. But I think what a lot of folks don't understand about our business model that we all share, it's not unique to us, although we're just new to it, is you have these requirements and obligations that are so expensive, and resource adequacy is one example where that market is just insanely out of control now and expensive. That's money that we're not spending on new build and really cool things because we're spending it on this market dynamic that's created, insane costs. And then for us in the San Diego region, we have kind of local obligations that are even harder to come by because of where we are and the access to local RA that we can and can't get to, and what's already under contract with our utility, et cetera. So it's a huge financial, burden to us that doesn't allow us to spend money on the other really more exciting things that we want to do.
Great. Would any of our other panelists like to comment on that question?
I've heard Ed Randolph describe the RA system as broken. He said it half jokingly, but it's a really, really tough one to get your arms around in so many respects. And there are so many cooks in the kitchen on resource adequacy between the PUC and the California ISO, and talking about ELCC, or effective load carrying capability, for those of you who don't know that term, and the implications on net qualifying capacity from the ELCC of wind and ELCC of solar, and now talk about declining ELCC of storage and managing all that commercially. It's very tricky. We find solutions, but ultimately it's an allocation of risk between developer and buyer. And what makes it challenging always is just the continually fluctuating rules. And the continued tweaking. And sometimes I just want to put it all on pause and just work in this market for 5 years without change. But I understand that it's got to evolve.
Great. Alex, I saw you have your hand up.
Yeah. I guess, certainly that there is a question of the allocation between, of risk between the developer and the buyer. And, I can appreciate that these rules are very complex, but that there is, a planning basis for them as well. In looking at, how we preserve reliability and how we actually get some price signals for what reliability costs. And I appreciate, concerns about cost, and we try to be, a low cost provider and to do our business effectively. With respect to compensation of existing units, there are major maintenance cycles, and that one of the reasons that you have RA is to make sure that the existing units that we're relying on are appropriately compensated so that they can meet the reliability demands. I will say one of the things, and Calpine's been pretty verbal about this, and it's not an issue in San Diego, is the imposition or the overlay of the central procurement entity. I'm not sure that that's been successful. And one of the things that we found that before the implementation of the CPE is that we were transacting on a term basis forward with a number of our CCA partners, and that gave us a great deal of certainty. It allowed us to plan for not only maintenance but also upgrades of facilities. And now with the the overlay of the CPE, I think it's really created it's really confused an already very confused system, and I'm not sure it's really meeting kind of either the reliability or the reliability dynamics that it was seeking to affect. So I hope that gets revisited, and we'd certainly be happy to work with the CCAs on revisiting it.
Thanks, Alex. Then the next question is for Tristan, but Tristan, did you want to comment on that first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I subscribe to all the comments on the need for stability and maybe simplification of the California rules that are evolving very quickly. If we look at it from a geopolitical point of view, I found extremely interesting the latest IEA Global Energy Outlook report from 2021, which for the first time since the shale gas came out is forecasting cost of electricity going back to the cost, the scarcity of resources, and the complexity of the system that we have to manage. When Cody was saying, in the pot of money that we have, if we allocate more to reliability, we can do more things. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do what we have to do from a climate point of view with the same pot of money. I think we have to be prepared. I'm a future customer as San Diegoan. I need to be prepared to pay more, and I think it's something that we have to think on. Right is the right way to do that. So, interestingly, electricity has been growing about 4% per year until 2008, something like that. Shale gas came out, and then it has gone down. We're in downward curves. And for the first time, we may be at another inflection point where it's going to go back up for multiple reasons. One of them is a much more complex grid to manage, but also geopolitically, it's really interesting what's happening right now in the supply chain. Some of the inflation that we see is hopefully temporary, maybe a year or two, but it's due to COVID, it's due to the congestion in Newport Beach, it's due to many things that should be solved. But also there is a new Cold War starting, where the energy independence of the U.S. and Europe has to be restored, and we can't continue to rely on 98% of the wafers being produced in China. So the administration has understood that and is acting to be able to set up a supply chain. But that also means that there may be some costs associated to it. I think we have to think geopolitically as well that we really are at an inflection point, not in terms of the way the grid is structured, but also the cost that goes behind it, and think a little bit differently about it. Sorry,
so Tristan, on that thread, there's a question from the audience wanting to hear about the infrastructure necessary to be able to use hydrogen in a generating station. This might also, Alex or Jim might also want to comment on this. But the question is, how does the hydrogen get from the point of creation to the point of use? And you were talking about affordability in your last answer, and I know that's an important factor here. But would you like to comment on that question at all?
Partially. I think it's a very vast question, so I don't know whether it's a technical question or more of a business model question. We see three market segments that we are present in, all of them as EDF. I think the most obvious one is mobility. As we mentioned, with 40% of the greenhouse gas coming from transportation in California, this is the most efficient sector to convert to a clean energy. And also because of the energy density of hydrogen, this is the best application where you can pay more for, because hydrogen costs money. It's the process of conversion is not efficient. So going from electricity to hydrogen, you have some losses, and then going back to electricity, you have some losses as well. So if you can skip one of the two steps and use the hydrogen directly in the car, that helps a lot, and the energy density helps a lot as well. So that's one segment where we are very active in Europe, actually, because a lot of the cities in Europe have a mandate to not have any gas-powered buses by 2025. So they're converting to hydrogen super fast, and we're growing very fast in that arena. So I think this is an avenue of the market that's going to grow fast, and it's going to be delivered as gasoline is delivered today. The second market is power, and we're present with you guys and others to serve with green electricity hydrogen facilities that we intend to invest in as well to deliver power at the end. And Alex alluded to that as well. This is maybe the less cost efficient of the three market segments that I'm talking about. And the last one is industrial, is using directly the hydrogen into the industrial plant. As we mentioned earlier, industrial is about 25% of the greenhouse gas effect in California. And being able to convert those industrial process to hydrogen would be critical. So each one of those market segments is very different. The supply chain is very different, and it's going to be different actors, but they will all require a very high level of industrial understanding and control, mastery, I should say, of the hydrogen manufacturing process, which is pretty dangerous from a safety point of view. It's very different from a solar plant or a wind plant. So it's closer to the chemical industry than it is to the power generation industry.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tristan. The next question goes to Alex, related to carbon sequestration. Some folks say that carbon sequestration may be relied upon as a way to continue extracting and burning fossil fuels, a process that disproportionately impacts low-income communities and communities of color. So the question is, what is Calpine doing to reduce use of fossil fuels in its generation portfolio?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. And it's a very good question, and I appreciate it. I think that, one of the questions overall is going to be, what is the right resource mix to help us achieve multiple goals? One of the goals that we're talking about is decarbonization. And, how can we effectively meet our decarbonization goals, which includes greater reliance on the electricity system? And, but there are other goals as well, other local environmental goals. There is, equity, and all of these are part of the discussion, and are, are happily or not or appropriately being put, out in front. I think that one of the things that I would say about, stationary source use of fossil fuels is that we're far more efficient than mobile sources. So that when we're converting, a molecule of natural gas, taking the energy content out of that and turning it into an electron, we're about 50% efficient at our combined cycles, whereas a car is about 14% efficient. Furthermore, we have abatement technologies with our use that you couldn't imagine. You couldn't put them on a mobile transportation. With respect to where the gas comes from, there are environmental justice issues associated with that economic activity. And there are some areas where it's better to produce natural gas than there are other areas. And certainly, as a buyer of natural gas, we've been working with, some of our suppliers to, okay, how can you make your process cleaner? And so the question, and then what I alluded to before, not alluded to, wait a second, I said it directly, is that I expect that over time, it's very likely that our units are going to run a lot less. They're going to run a lot less because there's going to be a bigger penetration of renewables. and that you're really utilizing the combined cycle fleet as your insurance policy to assure that the electric system is reliable. But then there's trade-offs. I mean, we were just talking about hydrogen and about the role of hydrogen and about the transportation of hydrogen. Those issues have to be grappled with as well as the land use issues associated with, a massive, renewable build-out. If we were to power all of the 25 combined cycles in the state with green hydrogen produced in the state, you're talking about, 2,500 square miles of land. Maybe that's not a big deal in California, but I think it might be. These are very complicated issues. We're all ears. We've been in the state since we were founded in the state in 1984. We've developed a lot of projects and we've worked with communities, I think, very well. And we continue to listen and learn.
Great. Thank you. So we have at least 2 more questions I'm going to try and get in before we wrap up. This next one goes to Cody. And Cody, given your comment about being expected to fly when you've really barely just hatched, feel free to adjust your answer as appropriate, because I know what that's like. I felt that way too when we were launching MCE. But the question is, what are some of your workforce development efforts, either planned or already underway?
Oh gosh, that is a big question, and we probably don't have sufficient meat on those bones yet to talk too much about. But happy to talk about, again, what we're dreaming of and wishing of, and unless the question has more specifics, I think of workforce in a couple of ways. Obviously, it's the labor that goes into building the projects, the bigger projects that we're talking about, right? And we work really closely with our local IBEW to look at those jobs and try to support that as much as we can. And our current board is for the most part supportive of that. They're also looking at jobs in the communities that we serve. So, typically this industry, and you look around in these conferences, virtual or in person, and they're not super diverse. And for us and our organization, we have a lot of goals and a mission to really be diverse in our own workforce and in the programs that we develop and who we're serving and how we're creating jobs, not just the big union jobs and the large scale, but the smaller scale work that we're generating as well. And so we would love to, we think about that a lot, and we put those parameters in everything that we do when we're contracting and whatnot. And we'd love to think more about building some sort of workforce training pipeline when we're big enough and mature enough to do that, to really diversify not only the industry, but our own internal pipeline and what we can do here to bring more people to the table in decisions and more people to the table in jobs that don't necessarily look like those of us already here. And I definitely would challenge anybody in this industry to do the same. It's hard. It's not easy to do. You have to invest in people and invest in more training, but you're going to start to see more and more organizations like us require that to the extent that we can, because there's some laws around that. And so the more that we can all diversify, that's going to help us as we all try to kind of set these goals and ratchet them up more. So okay. Yeah. Workforce is very diverse for me, but
yeah, thank you. No, that was super helpful. Okay, great. And this last question goes to Jim or Alex or Tristan, or all 3 of you, if you can keep your answers short. But the question is, how have commodity price increases impacted your company? And do you expect this to have an impact on forward progress towards our goals of 2045? Jim, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. We have certainly seen changes take place in the supply chain, whether it's solar panels or wind turbines or batteries. So we've seen impacts in all areas. One thing we try to do is be very transparent and very forthcoming with any of our customers with whom we're working. If things are, especially if we haven't signed a contract yet, if things are changing so substantially that they make a project uneconomic, we're trying to have those conversations early and make sure that we don't have any surprises come up late in the game. One thing we, at least for our company, even though we have seen impact on cost and impact on delivery schedules in some cases here and there, it helps that we have a large portfolio, so we've been able to shift some things around. Not everything's perfect, but we've been able to move some things around as best as possible to keep as many projects on track as we can. But yeah, there have been some things out there. I'll stop for now because I'm supposed to keep it brief.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, we're just about over time. Tristan or Alex, do y'all want to make any comments on that one?
Maybe very briefly, in particular on the solar side, we've seen panel cost increase by 25% plus. So yes, it has a big effect on project. The margins are not such that you can support that on project that was signed a year ago. So we think there will be project delay. There will be, which is bad for climate change resolution, and there will be project canceled. As Jim, we have a large portfolio, so we're fighting really hard to keep those projects alive, but it's a very dire situation on the supply chain front for sure.
And Alex, do you want to get the last word?
Happy to get the last word. I think both of my colleagues explained it very well. And again,
I'd love to add one more thing if I can.
Okay, real quick.
The American Solar Manufacturers Group anti-dumping countervailing duty complaint that they filed at the Department of Commerce a few months back. We were thrilled to see that go away. It was an anonymous group of solar manufacturers who will go unnamed. But things like that create extreme uncertainty for an industry that can go forward as long as 3 or 4 years until you actually know what that tariff is and how it's assessed. And if you have to allocate that risk between module supplier and module buyer, nobody's going to take that risk. So having that kind of anti-dumping complaint out there can have extreme impact on industry. So glad to see that go away. There's other tariff stuff still out there, like Section 201, which may get extended in February, maybe not. And other things like withhold and release orders that also have an impact on module delivery. So a lot of stuff happening out there that impacts projects.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Big thank you to all the panelists. And I just really appreciate all the great insights. Thank you also to those of you who are sponsoring and our panelists. And thank you to the audience for the great questions.